Imagine, just for a second, that all the water in the world just vanished today. Every river, every lake, completely gone. How long would we survive? A few weeks? Maybe just a few days? It's pretty terrifying to think about. But when we look back at our history, there is this one single body of water that didn't just keep humans alive. It literally gave birth to our entire civilization over 10,000 years ago. Without it, the map of the world would look entirely different today. No pharaohs, no great pyramids. Human history as we know it would have taken a completely different path.
Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. Today we're exploring the longest, arguably the oldest, and honestly the most mysterious river on Earth, the Nile. This is the exact place where humanity learned to write, where we figured out math, where we mastered early engineering. And it's a place that still hides secrets that completely baffle scientists today. We're going on a journey straight through the heart of Africa to uncover its history, its sheer power, and the modern threats that could change its course forever.
Here's a quick map of our journey today. We'll start with the birth of the Nile, move into civilization's gift, check out some mysteries and creatures, explore the modern era and dams, discuss water wars and climate, and wrap up with some amazing life and facts. Let's get to it.
Section 1. The Birth of the Nile, Origins and Geography.
Now, for centuries, Roman emperors and Greek philosophers desperately tried to figure out where this massive 6,650-kilometer river actually started. It was like a giant puzzle. It wasn't until the 19th century that explorers finally solved it, discovering that the Nile actually has two main sources. First, you have the White Nile, which flows right out of Uganda's massive Lake Victoria. And second, the Blue Nile, coming from Ethiopia. And here's the crazy part. The Blue Nile alone brings 85% of the river's water and soil. These two mighty forces finally meet up in Khartoum, Sudan, to form the main river that flows all the way up to the Mediterranean Sea.
Section 2. Civilization's Gift, the Ancient World. So, if we travel back in time to the ancient world, we're looking at a landscape that was incredibly hostile to human life. I mean, over 95% of Egypt is pure desert. The Greek historian Herodotus actually hit the nail on the head over 2,500 years ago when he said, "Egypt is the gift of the Nile." Seriously, if you take the river out of the equation, ancient Egypt would have just been a lifeless expanse of sand.
The real secret to this gift actually started way down south in the weather patterns of Ethiopia. Every single year, between June and September, heavy rains in the Ethiopian highlands would cause the Blue Nile to swell up. This sent massive, powerful floods rushing down into Egypt. And when those waters finally pulled back, they left behind something way more valuable than gold. They left this thick layer of dark, incredibly rich, fertile soil. The ancient Egyptians called this Kemet, which literally translates to black land. This soil was a total game changer. It allowed them to grow massive amounts of wheat, barley, and vegetables. In fact, they were so dependent on this cycle that they worshipped the river god Hapi. They'd offer flowers, grain, all sorts of precious items just to make sure those floods kept coming. Because they knew for a fact, no flood meant no food, and no food meant the end of their entire world. But here's the thing, the river wasn't just a giant farm. It was literally humanity's greatest teacher. Think about how this all cascades. You've got this fertile soil feeding a massive empire, and because people finally have enough food, they aren't just struggling to survive, they have time to build. But how on earth do you build something as colossal as the Great Pyramids without any modern machines? Well, the Nile. Scientists believe those millions of tons of stone were transported right on the river using boats. On top of that, because the Egyptians absolutely had to know exactly when the river would flood, they developed complex mathematics and engineered these things called nilometers to measure the water levels. Tracking these annual floods literally led to the invention of the calendar. Just think about that. A single river taught an entire civilization engineering, math, and logistics.
Section 3. Mysteries and Dangerous Creatures.
Of course, the Nile isn't just this peaceful provider of life, it has a very, very deadly side. 30 kilometers per hour. That is the terrifying speed a hippopotamus can swim. And yes, they will easily flip boats. Add to that the fact that they share the water with the Nile crocodile. These are 1,000-kilogram predators so fearsome that the ancient Egyptians actually worshipped them as a crocodile-headed god named Sobek. So yeah, definitely not a river you want to just casually take a dip in.
Beyond the wildlife, the river itself holds some seriously mind-bending scientific mysteries. First off, it flows backwards compared to most rivers, running from south to north, simply because its southern origins are at a much higher elevation. Second, Despite what we figured out in the 19th century, the exact furthest source of the river is still being debated today. We literally had modern expeditions in 2006 and 2022 claiming completely different starting spots in Rwanda and Burundi. Third, and this one is wild, geological records show that about 5.5 million years ago, during the Messinian salinity crisis, the Nile completely dried up. It turned into this massive, deep canyon. And finally, parts of the river today reach depths of up to 26 meters. To put that into perspective, that's like an 8-story building underwater. Archaeologists actually believe there are unrecovered ancient temples and statues just hiding down there in the dark right now.
Section 4. The Modern Era and Dams. Now, let's step out of the ancient past and fast forward to the modern era, where human ambition has really tried to tame this wild force of nature. In 1869, the Suez Canal was opened, which completely transformed global trade. Then, in 1970, Egypt achieved the seemingly impossible by building the Aswan High Dam. And most recently, jumping to 2011, Ethiopia began constructing the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, also known as GERD.
Let's look at the Aswan High Dam, because it is the absolute perfect example of a double-edged sword. Standing a staggering 111 meters tall and creating Lake Nasser, which, by the way, is over 500 kilometers long, it's an absolute marvel of engineering. It provides year-round irrigation, it controls those historic floods, and it generates 40% of Egypt's electricity. But the cost was huge. Building it threatened to permanently submerge ancient wonders. It got so bad that UNESCO had to launch an unprecedented mission to literally cut the Abu Simbel temples into pieces and move them 65 meters higher just to save them. And even worse from an ecological standpoint, the dam stopped that magical Kemet soil from flowing downriver. So today, Egyptian farmers are forced to buy chemical fertilizers. And without those new soil deposits, the entire Nile Delta is actually slowly sinking into the Mediterranean Sea.
Section 5. Water Wars and the Climate Crisis.
As we look at the river today, the challenges have shifted from building empires to, quite literally, fighting for survival. The biggest modern flashpoint right now is the GERD on the Blue Nile. Now, for Ethiopia, this dam represents their right to development. It's a massive, crucial source of electricity for their people. But on the other hand, you have 100 million Egyptians who rely almost entirely on the Nile for their survival. For them, any flow reduction is a literal existential threat. It's an incredibly high-stakes geopolitical issue, and it's currently being mediated by the African Union.
So the crucial point here is that geopolitics might not even be the biggest threat we're facing. Thanks to climate change, temperatures are rising and the Ethiopian mountain ice that feeds the river is melting away. The UN projects a terrifying 50% decrease in the Nile's flow by the year 2050. Let that sink in. Half the river, gone. That threatens over 300 million people living across the basin.
And the danger isn't just coming from a drying river, it's coming from the sea, too. Remember how we talked about the Nile Delta shrinking because the Aswan Dam trapped all that soil? Well, combine a sinking delta with rising global sea levels, and you have a recipe for absolute disaster. Alexandria, which is Egypt's second-largest city, sits merely 2 meters above sea level. It's crazy to think about, but the river that historically protected and nurtured human civilization might very soon need us to protect it. Section 6. Life, Facts, and Conclusion.
But despite all these modern threats, the Nile remains this incredibly vibrant artery of culture today. From families eating on wooden felucca boats in Cairo to tourists whitewater rafting down in Uganda, the river is just as alive today as it was millennia ago. And its banks? They are absolutely packed with global heritage. I mean, did you know Sudan actually has over 200 pyramids? That's more than Egypt. The world's first paper was made right here from papyrus, and the first ever recorded peace treaty in history, the Treaty of Kadesh, was signed right on these banks.
We've explored its mysterious origins, the ancient empires it built, the terrifying creatures that call it home, and the modern conflicts threatening its future. There's this ancient text that says, "The Nile is the breath of God." It's a powerful reminder that while a river can birth an empire, nature always holds the final card. With its waters literally drying up, and nations preparing for conflict, will the very river that birthed human civilization ultimately be the spark for our first great water war? Thank you so much for joining